Okay. Always hard to know where to start. Uh, there's so much. Um, can you hear me okay? Okay. Um, well, I was one of four children um, born to a young couple. My mother was 21 when she had four children. My dad was 22. So my dad had gone through the Korean War and came out an alcoholic. So he was a very abusive alcoholic. Um, we, my mother was a sweet. She didn't drink or smoke or anything, and I'm sorry, there are going to be gaps in here. um, we had, as a result of his alcoholism, we moved a lot when we were younger, and my mother worked all the time, so she pretty much kept the household going. When she worked, when we were in school, we would have to go from the school, go to her work, and get in the car and stay in the car until she got off of work, and we would go home. And we couldn't go anywhere. We just had to go to the car and stay in the car and be quiet and not really let anybody know we were there. She'd come out at times and bring us something to eat or something. And that kind of carried on as my dad drank more. She would take us at night to find him many times, and we would go to the bars and we would sit in front of the bars, and the same thing. We just had to be quiet and stay in the car. As we moved around a lot, we stayed with a lot of people, a lot of relatives, a lot of situations we were really unsure about, a lot of strangers in our lives. And so we children learned to stick together, kind of protect each other and help each other out. We also lived in the mountains much of our young life or on farms. And we loved that because we could just go anywhere. During the day, we'd just take off and come back when it's time to eat and just have little adventures. So we were free. There was a point where we lived in a small place in the mountains and like a little travel trailer. Actually, we stayed with our grandparents, and there was a root cellar attached to the trailer, and that's where we would sleep. They would put us in at night and close the cellar door and come let us out in the morning. There were a lot of scary times because you're little children, it's dark, you don't know where your parents are. And so we kind of all stayed together, or we would, I was the shyest one, even though I was the one probably the most protective of my brothers and sisters, because I kind of felt like they were what would help. We all had to survive together. And as we got older, we continued to move around. We didn't stay in many schools very long. We were bounced around from school to school to school. And as a result, it made me more shy, less confident. I usually didn't know where I was academically in school because every school was different. And, I got terrified if a teacher called on me. But the I became known as uh, during recess, my brothers and sisters were all there at school. And for some reason, my brother got picked on. I think because we moved from a state where we had an accent to a state where, well, we didn't have an accent in the state where we originally grew up, but then we went to California where we had an accent. So my brother got teased the most. And he would always out on the playground. So I started jumping in and defending my brother. So I got a reputation of leave him alone as long as I was around. So as we grew and time went on, my brother would come running home from school and with boys chasing him, and my dad would tell me I had to get out. We had to fight these boys together. And if we didn't win, then he would make sure, we had something to cry about or whatever, because we had to win the fight. And so I learned to fight at a young age, different than a girl would fight, because I'm fighting boys to keep my brother safe. He was younger than I was. But as time went on, we still moved a lot. My mother, we didn't see my mother a lot because she worked all the time. So we didn't have that contact with her as much, but she was always really sweet and kind, when she was around. My dad, we feared him. He was a wonderful man when he wasn't drinking. We would do things as a family and go places and stuff, but when he drank, he was abusive, and he would end up beating my mom up, and then the police would come and beat him up. And so it was traumatic both ways, seeing your mom get beat up and see your dad get beat up. And he, there was a point where my mother couldn't take it anymore. And I think as a result, my older sister, she would try to jump in and defend my mom. And so she would get the worst of the beatings because she was in the forefront. I learned to be a chicken and hide in the background because I knew whoever he got his hands on first would get hurt the worst. So I always kind of stayed in the background and stayed away from him if I could. So I learned to fear him and stay away from him. We had my older sister, I think, as a result, got into drugs, and because of all of that. And I hated them. I would always tell her I was going to tell on her and stuff like that. But she had to drag me everywhere she went as we got older. She couldn't go anywhere unless I went with her. And it kind of, our relationship turned. She wasn't as supportive and kind and helpful to me anymore. I was more of a problem to her because she had to take me everywhere she went, if she could go. So that put me in more uncomfortable situations because my sister would just leave me with people I didn't know, and they were usually older people. They were doing drugs, and it was scary. The same when our growing up, our parents would leave us home alone a lot, and especially at night, and that was always scary too because there were times people would try to get in the house, or my dad was a prankster also, so he would always pull pranks on us. And as a children, that was real. It wasn't a joke. And so, we became more fearful. I did. I don't know about my brothers and sisters. and more shy and more withdrawn, especially when you saw people that when you were staying with them, how they related to you. You know, they didn't always, even relatives, um, they didn't really want you there, but you were there. Just get a drink. So after years of abuse, my mother decided she couldn't take this anymore. And they decided to get a divorce. And we as children were thrilled when they told us they were getting a divorce, because we felt like, we wouldn't have the abuse anymore. And my mom wouldn't, we could have our mom then. Um, and then my mother got involved with, my dad left, he left state. So we really didn't see him much anymore. My mother got involved with a friend of theirs, which he turned out to be an alcoholic too, but he wasn't a physically abusive alcoholic. He was a mental abusive alcoholic. And she married him. He was very nice to us during the time before they got married, but once they got married, he let us know that things were going to change and they were going to be done his way. And by then we were teenagers. So, we rebelled because he took our life away. He wouldn't let us see any friends because he didn't like our friends. He wouldn't let us go out. We just had to stay in our room all the time. When we got home from school, we were to do our chores, and most of the time through the years, we had horses, and we also had horses then. When my mom and dad divorced, and then with my stepdad, because that's kind of how they met him, through horses. We used to ride in the horse shows and do things in the horse shows. So he would tell us it was just all about, we had to take care of our horses, we had to do our chores, and then we had to go to our rooms. We couldn't go out with people. If they called, he'd let us talk for 3 minutes, and then he'd hang the phone up on us. So we became prisoners in our own home. If he didn't like something, he would make us clean, or make me clean. By that time, it was just my 2 younger siblings and myself, because my older sister had met somebody, got married, and left home to get away from my dad. So she wasn't with our stepdad in the home. And we were just prisoners in our own home. So, I started cutting school and to have a social life, because I couldn't have it when I was, once I got home. And of course, things got worse then. There were the schools that I went to, typically if we were at a school all year, there were times we were, at a school a couple years in a row, but not typically. I was very much into the art and the sports. So I was usually on the president's list of physical fitness every year, because I just focused on that instead of the problems. And then there was a time that I had gotten a motorcycle accident, and I couldn't walk for a number of months. And during that time, my older sister introduced me to drugs, and I started taking them at that point. And I used them because they were a way of escape. I didn't really like them, but I didn't have to think about my problems when I used the drugs. So, I got very involved with drugs after that, and to keep my sanity from my stepdad. There were many times when my mom worked again. So when we got home from school, my stepdad got there soon after we got home, because he worked early and he got up early. But there were many times when we were outside doing our chores or things that we could, especially me. I shouldn't say many times, there were times that I could hear bullets go past me. And, I believed at that point, my stepdad, because he hated me the worst, me and my brother. I don't know why. But he didn't like my brother or I. He liked us least. And he eventually put my brother in a boys' ranch, because my stepdad was also a deputy sheriff on the side. So he had power, and nobody believed children back then. They just believed the adults. So he locked him away, put him in a boys' ranch, and threatened to lock us up somewhere as well if we didn't mind him or do what he said. And, I did rebel, because my whole life had been turned upside down and changed. We all rebelled. So there was a point with him that we knew as children that he was going to either kill us or lock us away. And we knew we needed to get rid of him or get away from him. So I had met this boy, and he asked me out, and I begged my mother to let me go out, because typically they wouldn't let us go anywhere. And I just begged her and told her I'd be home at midnight. And she agreed, as long as I was home at midnight, and I promised her I would be home. But once I got out, and I had every intentions on it, but once I got out, I couldn't go back. I just knew I could never go home again. And to that kind of an oppression. I would have rather got a beating physically than a mental beating that my stepdad, would do. And because there were nights he wouldn't let me sleep at all. I had to stay up and clean. I mean, we had a very clean house, because I was always having to clean. And so I told the guy I was with, he told me to, it's almost midnight, I'm going to take you home. And I said, I can't go. So we had been at my older sister's house, and I knew my mom would come looking for me that next morning. So early in the morning, before light, I went out in the woods. She lived near the woods. And I went out in the woods and waited for my mom to come. And she came. She only stayed a few minutes at my sister's, and then she left. And I never saw my mom or heard from her for years after that. I feel like she didn't care enough to try. And there were many times I was very resentful of my mom, because there were many times during those years I would tell my mom things that my stepdad would do. He never sexually, tried anything, because I think he knew my dad. If he ever found out, he would probably do something to him he didn't want. So he never did. He was just a mental abuser. And I would tell my mom through the years, things he would do. And my mom would just say, oh, he's just trying, you know, his best. He's just trying to help you kids. And she never listened, to what we would tell her. And looking back, it was because my mom found somebody that cared for her. And she worked all the time, so she didn't know what was going on at the house. And she didn't think it was that bad. So at that point, I really resented my mom and never, I didn't want to see her anymore. And I didn't. She didn't try to find me. She didn't, I didn't try to find my mom, especially after they moved. I didn't know where my mom was. Of course, back then there were no cell phones, there were just phones. And uh, then my brother, well, he was in the boys' ranch for several years. And then my younger sister ended up leaving home. She actually found a foster home, and the social worker agreed to let her live with this foster family. And so there were years that I didn't know where my family was. I knew where my older sister was, but she just was not very nice, to any of us. And so I didn't go around her. I didn't know where my younger sister was. I didn't know where my brother was. And I felt I had lost my whole family because my family was everything, to me. And even my dad, as much as we feared him, there were times that he was a really nice guy when he wasn't drinking. But, he did get to the point where he drank most of the time. And, I lost my family and I didn't know how to fight it. I was just out there. I was living with this guy at this point. And, he turned out to be a drug dealer and abusive towards me. Um, he would leave me home, a lot of times, and he'd go sell drugs or whatever he did, and then come back. And there was a point living with him. He was very controlling in that if I went to the store or anywhere, I had to account for my time, account for the money, account for everything. And he just was very controlling. And there were several times I tried to leave him. People don't understand why people stay with people that are being abused. Well, in this situation, every time I left him, he would find me and physically drag me back. Since he was a lot stronger than I couldn't, he would physically put me in a vehicle and hold me down until we got to the house. So I got to the point with him that I felt like the only way I was going to get out of that situation was he was going to kill me, because there were times I would come home from the store or something and he would like have a noose around hanging from the porch, kind of things like that. And just to scare me more. So we lived on a street that was at a dead end, and there was a field out right beside our house. And I would go out in the field at night, and I would lay down in the field and look up in the stars and just say, there's got to be something there. There's got to be a God. There's got to be something. I just felt like if the stars, if the sky would open, I could see what there was. And my first prayer, well, backing up, we weren't raised anything. We weren't raised in a church. We didn't go to church as children. We just knew what was right and wrong because God puts that in every heart. So we didn't have any kind of a Christian background. And except my mother did buy the Bible stories and the bedtime stories and read them to us faithfully every night as children. And so if you want to say that's probably the only reason I had any kind of thought of God. So I'd be out in this field, just looking up into heaven and just saying, if there's a God, if you're real, this is my first prayer was, if there is a God and you're real, make this guy hate me so he'll let me go. And as time went on, this one night he didn't come back at all. And I decided I can't do this anymore. This was my line. I drew in the sand because I guess because my dad, when he didn't come home, it was hard on my mom. So I decided I'm leaving and I don't care if he kills me. He's not going to force me to come back. So we had met this couple. I called them and asked them if I could move in with them. And they told me they'd get back with me later, which they did, and told me I could move in with them. So I packed my little bag and told them I would be over there, in a little while. And by the time I had packed my bag, the guy I was living with came back, and I told him that I was leaving, and he said, "Good, I hate your guts, get out." So it was just such a huge relief knowing this guy hated me. He didn't want me there anymore. He wasn't going to force me to stay. So I left, and I lived with this couple, and they had children. So I did everything I could. I cleaned for them, I cooked for them, I babysat for them. Anything they needed, I was just grateful and thankful to be away from him. And over the months, I felt like this huge weight had just been lifted off of me, this burden from being with this guy, that I was free. Just can't even explain, except just this whole weight come off of me. And at that point, I had a girlfriend that was not a Christian. She had told me her mother had told her, there's only one way to go up, and that's up, when you're down. And that was a hope for me. And she said something like, and I clung to that as hope, that there's only one way to go, and that's up. So I started saying, and we talked about being in our right minds and things, and I started saying, I'm in my right mind. I'm in my right place. I'm with you, God. Be with me. Oh, I know. She told me her mother said I'm in my right mind. I'm in my right place. So that was the hope I held on to. I'd never heard anything like that. So I said it every day, but I added I'm with you, God, be with me. So all through the minute I woke up, through the day, before I went to sleep, I said, I'm in my right mind. I'm in my right place. I'm with you, God, be with me. So as time went on, I literally felt my mind flare up, living with these people Um, they didn't do anything special, just I lived there with them and uh, earned my keep with them. So my mind started clearing up. I didn't want to do drugs, as much. Um, and okay, so through all of this as well, I had gotten involved with because they lived on the road that I lived on, the street that where I lived with this guy, and um, other family members got involved. I got involved with um, the notorious outlaw motorcycle gang, and strangely enough, God used those people to protect me. You would not think, but they had witnessed me living with this guy. They could see what went on. They didn't like him. They didn't like what he did to me. And just by observing. And so, I've gotten involved with these people. And believe it or not, the first time I'd ever gone to their place of gathering, where they all gather all the time, I felt like I was home. It was just the strangest feeling. I was home. And like I said, these people protected me. They did not treat me like a lot of women got treated, and maybe because I was hard, at that point, but I was not promiscuous, and that's the one thing that they don't like, is if you're promiscuous, they treat you that way. And so they treated me like a little sister, and wherever we went, they'd tell me to stay here or stay there, and I'd do it because there were a lot of situations you were in danger. You didn't know where you were going when you went. You really didn't know if you were coming back, because there were so many people in this group that, that didn't know you. There were a lot of good ones. There were a lot of not good ones. And you just didn't know. You didn't know what you were going into when you left your house. So, I have been involved with them. And as I had continued to pray, I'm in my right mind, I'm in my right place, I'm with you, God be with me. A little cottage came available across the street from my older sister, and which was also on the same street that I had lived on with this guy that he left too. So this little cottage came available, and I felt it was my right place. It was just the right place for me. It was just this little tiny little cottage behind these three little old ladies from India. And we thought they were very strange ladies, very strange ladies. In fact, everybody that lived in the neighborhood was very clear. Nobody touched these ladies. Nobody touched their property. Everybody knew. They thought they were like evil ladies. And I did too. Everybody knew if you did anything to these little ladies, their property, anything, something bad was going to happen to you. Nobody in the neighborhood touched anything with these. They were fearful of these three little ladies. And so I rented their cottage. And they had, as I was there, I continued to, say, I'm in my right mind, I'm in my right place, I'm with you, God be with me. And as I was in this little cottage, I started hearing a voice call my name. And It wasn't just in the cottage, but that's where I lived. The first time I was there, I heard this voice say Glenda, just as audible as that. And I said, what? Because I thought somebody was calling me. And then I realized there was nobody there. I was in this little place by myself. Nobody's there. Nobody came to the door. No, nothing. But I didn't. It was so audible. I thought, well, I better go out and look, outside. So I walked around and nobody's there. So over time, this voice would call my name. And I would say, what? It was always so automatic, saying, responding back. Like you would say, Glenda, and I'd say, what? It was just an automatic response. And it didn't matter whether I was roaring down the road on the back of a motorcycle with 100 motorcycles, can't hear anything but the motorcycles. This voice would call my name. Or if I was by myself, it didn't matter, but it was always a very distinct, audible voice. And I would always say, what? And then I started getting frustrated with this voice because it would call my name and I would answer, and then there was silence. So I started saying, who are you and what do you want from me? You call my name and I answer, and then you don't say anything. Who are you? What do you want? I was talking with this voice out of frustration, kind of, like, what do you want? Who are you? I don't even know, So there was always silence. And then one day, this same voice told me to go to church. And I busted out laughing so hard because me going to church, I didn't even like Christians. I didn't know Christians, but I just didn't like them. They were never part of my world. Didn't come across them, or if I did, it's just like I didn't want anything to do with them. So I started thinking seriously, well, where do you go to church? Who do you go to church with? How do you go to church? I know that seems very strange for most people, but I didn't know because I hadn't gone to a church. And so as I thought about it, I started searching my mind. Everybody I knew how do you go to church? Do I know anybody that goes to church? Where do you go to church? And then there was one aunt that I knew went to church, but she lived in another state. So it's like, okay, well, I guess that's it. I'd searched everything in my mind and everything. It's like, well, I guess that's it. I'm not going to church because I don't know how and where and when, or whatever. So that I settled that in my mind. And then as I was again in my little house, the voice told me, ask your landladies to go to church. And I'm like, my landladies, of course. Once the voice told me to ask my landladies to go to church, I knew they went to church, but I didn't know they went to church prior to the voice telling me to ask them. So I went and out my front door and went to their back door and knocked, and all three always came to the door when I came. So, I'll never forget, they all came and they're all like this, and I just blurted out, can I go to church with you this week? And they were all like, yes, be ready 9:00 Saturday. I said, what? They said, yes, be ready 9:00 Saturday. I said, Saturday? That's one thing I did know is people went to church on Sunday. I'd never heard of people going to church on Saturday, even though we read the Bible stories, never caught it. So I just kind of flipped around in a daze and walked back to my cottage and said, I was terrified at that point because I didn't know people went to church on Saturday. I I didn't even know a Jew was a real person. You know, that's how my sheltered I had been. And then, you know, being on all the drugs, I didn't know Jews were real. I thought it was a figure of speech. So um, I had figured out from the time I got from their house to mine that I knew that I had to go with them because I'm the one that asked them. And I knew if I didn't go, they would hound me to death to go with them because I had asked. So I said, okay, in my mind, I'll go this one time and I'll never go again. But I had an excuse. I already had an excuse in my mind what I was going to tell them after the first time I went to church. So I settled that. And then I got in my little place and I said, what am I going to wear? You know, all I had was pants. I didn't own a dress. Somehow that came in my heart. You got to wear a dress. So I went to the Goodwill store and bought this. It was in the 70s. Bought this long embroidered dress. I thought it was so beautiful. You know? It was fit the era back then, you know. And I had long, real long, straight hair, you know. So I bought this beautiful dress and I was ready 9 o'clock Saturday. And we went to church. We got there for song service. And as I was hearing these words to these songs, I just felt God wrap his arms of love around me. And he said, in the same voice I'd been hearing, I am who you have been searching for. And I had been into so many searching so long. I had gotten myself involved in a lot of stuff, you know, because I was searching and find out it's not what I wanted to be involved. But he told me in the same voice, I am who you have been searching for. And the first time in my life, I felt loved. I had never felt love from my mom, my dad, my relatives, you know, nobody. And I felt this tremendous love surrounding me. And of course, nobody heard it around me, just me. And I had decided I wanted to know who this God was and why he loved me. So I started I asked the pastor if I could have Bible studies. People started giving me books. Well, the pastor and the little ladies started giving me Spirit of Prophecy books to read and a Bible, you know, and that was very special when the pastor gave me a Bible. And I would be reading the books. If somebody knocked on my door, it all went under the sofa or the chair. I told nobody I was going to church. I went from that day forward, I went every single Sabbath. I wanted to know who God was and why he loved me. And he had, as I had learned who God was, then I decided to make a commitment to him and be baptized. And I had through the time that I was studying with the pastor, I could sense he never warmed up to me, so to speak. You know, I never felt comfortable with him. I never felt, you know, I always felt like he was just like holding me at arm's length, you know, just there's something not quite right with you. And, you know, I was very open, you know, and told him my life story. And, but God started changing me. And I knew that I had to tell these guys that I was going to that I'd been going to church and I was going to be baptized and that I wasn't going to be part of their life anymore. And I didn't know how that was going to go because you always hear stories you can't get out. And it's really the men that can't get out. But usually the women don't get out in a very nice way, you know. But, and, you know, I had, I think it was harder because I had been brought in the inner circle with these people. They trusted me implicitly. And because they knew I would say nothing, you know, about anything. And, but I didn't want to know anything, you know, didn't want to be in a position to know anything. And so I went to them and I told them that that I had been going to church and I had decided to be baptized and that I wasn't going to be involved with them anymore. And they told me, it's my life, it's my choice, no problems. And that was such a huge relief because I didn't know what they were going to say, you know, how they were going to react. However, for many years, you know, after that, it was still uncomfortable, you know, because I didn't know if something was going to come back on me, you know, somewhere. And, you know, they'd show up in my door or something. And I still lived in the same road, in the same cottage where they lived. I just changed my life. God took away the desire to do any drugs, to any alcohol. You know, there was no desire to do any of that once I started learning who God was. And when, after I'd been baptized, the pastor had, I had moved away and then came back for a visit. And the pastor wanted to introduce me to a couple that he had been studying with that uh, was not wanting to give up bacon. So they didn't want to be baptized because they didn't want to give up bacon. And he introduced me to this couple, and what he said just hit me in the face, and I knew what I knew all the, you know, time that I was studying stuff with them. He said, you know, I want to introduce you to this girl. He said, when she used to come to church, I used to say, I'd look at her and say, there's no hope. There's no hope for her. Why does she come? Why does she bother? All the time I studied with him, he said, he said the same thing. There's no hope for her. You know, why does she bother? And he said, but she's the only person I've ever seen do a 180-degree turn and changed. He said, even her facial features aren't even the same as they were when she first came, you know, started coming to church. That I'd never seen a transformation like this. And I knew then that my feelings of him doing this to me was real, you know, but I just praise God that I was the first convert he had ever seen, which is pretty sad, you know, that he actually saw a transformation in me. And through the years, you know, it wasn't easy because, you know, there were a lot of people that, you know, kept you at arm's length because they kind of knew your past and stuff. But what kept me going was God called me. And I was going for God and I wasn't going for them. And over time, I eventually reconnected with my mom. And even though she wasn't allowed to see me, or her other children at that point. He wouldn't allow her to see him. So she'd sneak and see me, at times. And uh, then when I went to Wildwood, my mom and stepdad, they always, every summer, they take a cross country trip because his family lived in North Carolina. So they'd go visit. They'd do all the family reunions all across the country. And, but she'd never come see me. And this one time, my mom decided, I'm going to see my daughter. I have 4 kids and I can't even see my children. So uh, I was at Wildwood at the time, and she came through. Uh, she came and visited me, and they parked their motorhome off of in town. And so the day that she was going to leave, or the day before, I'd asked her about my stepdad. And I said, well, I'm going to, I'm going to go say hi or bye to him. She says, why bother? He doesn't want to see you. And he was always, through the years, when we actually started reconnecting, well, we didn't. But once I got back with my siblings, and if I was at one of my siblings' house and my stepdad and my mom was there, when I walked in, he would always get up and walk out. He would never stay in the same room with me. Or if I came and they came after me, he'd walk in and see me and he'd turn around and walk out and stay in the car. He would never be in the same room with me. That was really hurtful, because it's like, what did I do to you? And so I decided, I'm going to say bye to him, or hi, bye, whatever. And even though he didn't like me, it was so many years had gone by. It's like, I don't care what he thinks, I'm going to go. So I went over there, and actually I'd gotten pregnant just the same time I'd gotten into the church, and raised had a son, which I believe God allowed that because he knew I needed something to focus on raising, for God and having worship and things, with this child. Um, because I probably wasn't strong enough as just an adult, young adult, being new in the church. There's so many things, that I could have ended up going back out, but I know God allowed me to have this child, to focus on God. So, so me and my son went over to say bye to my stepdad and my mom. And the minute we walked in the motorhome, he did his usual, got his shoes on. He was going to stand up and walk out. And I had, I just told him, that I just wanted to come over and say hi to him and bye. And he just broke down, and he sat down and he just talked to me, and talked to my son. And it was just helped the healing, come, even though, all those years he didn't like me, I didn't like him. I knew I had to forgive my family, my parents, and in order to heal, um, when I became a Christian. So as the years that I got to know them, got to know their story, their side, it helped me to understand them more. and help me to forgive also, knowing their lives wasn't the greatest either. You know. And my stepdad died and my mom died. I took care of my mom. Uh, she had Alzheimer's, and I took care of her uh, about a year and a half before she died. And my dad's still living, and he's a little harder. He's to get to know through the years. When I had, young, we'd go visit my dad. He remarried right away. Um, he would just leave us. We would, they would just leave. you know, we didn't know where they went, when they were coming back. Uh, there was one time where my younger sister, my brother, and myself went to stay with my dad and his wife, and they ran a hamburger place. So we went there every day, and they showed us how to make everything. And then one day they were gone. We got up, and my dad and his wife was gone. So we decided, and we were little kids. We weren't big kids, we were little. We're still little, but we were little, tiny kids, even though we were teenagers. Um, we decided to go and open the hamburger place and do what we were taught to do. So we went for a few days, me and my little tiny sister and brother. We made the hamburgers and we did the shakes and whatever customers came and wanted. And so after a few days, the police came, wanted to know where our parents were, and we could not tell them because we did not know where they were. So they had, we were in another state at that point, and I remember just begging them, please let me go home. I just want to go home. I don't want to be here because social services could have taken us away, and it would have been harder for my mom to get us back. So the owner of the hamburger place decided to give us money. He put us on a bus and sent us back to California. 3 teenage kids. And he said, when you get, this is a loan, someday I want you to pay me back. And he gave us his address. And my thought, because, I wasn't a Christian at that point or anything, and my thought was, I'm not going to pay you back. I just want to go home. So but I kept his number all those years. And when I became a Christian, I called him up and I sent the money that he gave us back, to him. And believe it or not, he was a Seventh-day Adventist. So it was such a shock. Yeah. And I had, God had convicted me to do what it says to, repay, ask forgiveness, people, pay back what you took or whatever. And during the years of living out, there, especially with that guy, I would go into stores and steal food because that was the only way I was going to eat, because he didn't care. He'd just leave and whatever. So I would go back to the store, that I took food, and I told them I stole food, and then I'd pay them back. Everybody was so good, nobody asked for you to pay them, but they were just shocked that you came back and admitted what you did and tried to make it right. So I did what I could to make things right, with everybody that I could remember, was fresh in my mind, what I had done wrong. And, it wasn't always an easy, uh, being a Christian, being an Adventist, being converted, it was not easy. I'm sure everybody knows that, but God changes you. He keeps working with me and helping me and um, helping me to grow. And so here I am. God is not finished with me yet. There's still a long way to go. But I have a good son. I have a good relationship with my siblings, and um, I have wonderful friends, and so God is good.
Amen.
He's good.
Amen, Glenda. I love you. Thank you so much for putting words on your feelings, and we are probably not me who is crying with you. It's such an incredible story, how God can make a jewel out of you. I mean, you are such a beautiful person, and I think that one of the reasons is because you have gone through so much, so you understand people, what they are going through in their hearts.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing that God has given me, the ability to not judge. Well, that's not entirely true. I judge a lot. God forgive me for that. But when I see people in situations, I understand where they are. A lot of people have come into churches, they look like they're not supposed to be there. I remember how I was treated, and you just have to love these people.
Right.
So, and if God's working in their life, He's working in their life. But we've got one thing I just want to say that was so, it really struck me is I'd stayed friends with many of these, motorcycle gang people through the years, because they were kind to me. I didn't fear them. I mean, if you were in the wrong situation, you should fear them, but in my situation, it wasn't. I asked them, many of them, how did you become and I'm not going to name the group, everybody know who they are. How did you become one of them? Always their answer was the same. It was different version, different story, but their answer was always, because this is the only group of people that ever accepted me for who I am.
It was church for them.
What? Absolutely.
It was their church.
Yes, they were accepted by this group of people. So they became loyal and became one of these people because nobody else had ever accepted them. And we, as Christian, Seventh-day Adventists, whatever we are, God-fearing people, we've got to accept people and love people, or they will never come in. We've got to put aside our own views of people and life and situations and just love them and accept them. Doesn't mean we have to put up with some things, but that was that they all had the same story. They were the only people that accepted them.
Well, your story certainly blessed me, and I had a similar experience where the Lord spoke to me, but not audibly. When He called me, it was internal, but it was Him. Same thing.
Yeah, and when you hear His voice, you know who it is. you know, and through the years, many times, he would call me to wake me up. You know, always the same voice. You knew it was him. You know, he's such a good God.
That's a comforting alarm clock.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. You've really blessed me today.
You're welcome. You're welcome.